It's election eve, and with a big group of people still undecided, Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton are blitzing the country, fighting for every last vote. I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Gadigal people in Sydney. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. Over 5.6 million Australians have already cast their vote in a pre-poll record just over 24 hours before booths close. The Australian Electoral Commission has confirmed over 1 million more votes were cast by the close of polling yesterday than at the same time in the 2022 election, a 122% jump. What does this mean for the two leaders? I'll ask my panel. The Prime Minister has made his final pitch to voters, saying he's the right person to lead Australia in a time of global uncertainty. The Prime Minister visited 3 states today, ending in the crucial battleground state of Victoria, where he has sought to differentiate himself from the state Labor government. You'll hear from the Prime Minister first up in a moment. And opposition leader Peter Dutton says there's no doubt he can become the nation's Prime Minister despite lagging in the polls. Mr Dutton says he believes the result could be similar to 2019 when Scott Morrison beat Bill Shorten despite poor polling. I'll speak to the Greens Deputy Leader Mehreen Faruqi for the minor party's view. As many of our viewers will know, this election will be the ABC's beloved election analyst Anthony Green's last on air. He's been busy prepping in Sydney for his final election night broadcast. He's deep in rehearsals. He's made a little bit of time for us ahead of tomorrow night. Anthony, so great to have you on the show. How do you feel ahead of the last dance?
Looking forward to never having to do another rehearsal in my life. I think... It's actually the rehearsals that kill me more than the actual broadcasts.
Let's pull back the curtain and explain to people what you do, because I think people think we just do it. Walk us through a day in the life of Anthony Green.
Well, I mean, in the run-up, it's the vast amount of compilation and checking. At the moment, I'm double-checking a whole bunch of polling places where the data the commissioners provide to us as history doesn't make sense, so having to recalculate. It's to do with redistributions and the impact that it has. So I've been doing all that, as well as working out headlines and, titles to go at the top of the graphics, which makes sense, and making sure they're loaded and making sure we get every available preference for me. So there's also stuff like that. And then there's the endless pre-records and chats and playing around with graphics.
With me. You're doing an excellent job. I've watched you in action all day, and you are quite brilliant. There's less than 24 hours before polling day, Anthony. How do you now see the contest ultimately placed?
Well, going on the various polls, and clearly the government has improved in the run-up to and then during the campaign. And the polls are all indicating that the government is probably on track to around the same results as last time. Whether it be slightly worse or slightly better in terms of seats, that's difficult to determine. But the votes seem to have sort of drifted back towards the results of the last election, and the coalition vote has sort of slipped away during the campaign. Now, is that to do with the campaign? Is that to do with things before the campaign? Is it to do with Donald Trump? There's a whole series of things which are obviously at play there, and I'm sure that whoever loses this election will end up having a bit of a post-mortem on what went right and what went wrong. But look, the position is, it looks like the government should finish with more seats than the opposition, and that would leave them better placed to form government after the election. It's a question of how close to get to majority, or if they do reach majority. But that's what the polls are saying. But as I always like to say, that's what the polls are saying in 2019, and that's not the result that was produced.
That's absolutely correct, and which is why we're very cautious, not just because of that year, but generally until people vote. We don't know how things are going to break. Let's talk paths to victory briefly. The coalition's path to victory is a hard one, but can you see one?
Well, their problem is they need to pick up about 10 seats just to get more seats than Labor, and to get close to being able to form a functioning majority government, they probably need to pick up 14 or 15 seats. Now, at the start of the campaign, you would have said, well, they can pick up a swag in Victoria. There's a whole series of seats they could win in New South Wales and a few more elsewhere, and that's the path to victory. But it does appear, and again, we're relying on polls, we're relying on briefings from politicians, it does appear that the prospects for a lot of gains for the Liberal Party in Victoria have diminished. It doesn't look like there's going to be much change in Queensland, New South Wales, it does appear that some of the talk of the seats they would gain, you're only hearing 2 or 3 seats mentioned now, not 4, 5, 6 that were mentioned a few weeks ago. And beyond that, unless there's a breakout in Western Australia, there just aren't enough states in Tasmania and South Australia to tip it one way or the other. So, I mean, we will be, if it's not clear in that first 2 hours of the coverage, we'll be waiting for 8 o'clock as we did last time for the Western Australian results.
It's going to potentially be a long night, so I'm going to let you go and crunch some numbers. Anthony, can't wait to spend some more time with you.
Thank you.
Both leaders went breathlessly around the country today, traversing states and seats, delivering their final pitch to voters. Now, opposition leader Peter Dutton began the day in Adelaide, flew to Perth, where he stood up in the seat of Tangney, West Australia's most marginal seat. He struck an optimistic tone, as he has all morning, invoking coalition victory in 2019 and saying their objective was to win.
I've been clear in relation to my objective, and that is to win the election tomorrow. We're not in this for anything other than doing the best for our country, and the best outcome for our country is to change a bad government out. Don't forget the last 3 years. The last 3 years have been a failure right across the economy and people's lives. People have really suffered because of a bad government. Interest rates came down in the United States and Canada and New Zealand, comparable countries otherwise, well before they did here. And they've come down by 0.25%. That's not enough to support people. So I am excited to be in this position and excited to look tomorrow to an outcome which will be a better future for our country. And that's what we've been working day and night to achieve. And I have no doubt in my mind that we can win the election and get our country back on track.
The Prime Minister, for his part, started the day in Queensland before heading through Tasmania and ending in Victoria. In the middle of what was a frenzy, we spoke to the Prime Minister in Devonport, Tasmania, who was reflective but disciplined on the final day of the campaign. Prime Minister, welcome to the program.
Greetings from Devonport.
Now, you're blitzing 3 states and have limited time, so let's quick-fire this interview. Prime Minister, you were emotional speaking earlier today. Are you tearing up because you're worried you might lose?
Not at all. I know a lot's at stake in this election campaign. Building a better future under Labor, strengthening Medicare, supporting our economy, supporting the transition to a clean energy economy, or what the Coalition have to offer, which is higher taxes, higher deficits and savage cuts.
Are you worried the unpopular Victorian Labor government could cost you a majority?
Oh, what we're doing is campaigning in each and every part of Australia, including in Victoria. And I'll be in Victoria later today, looking forward to campaigning there and looking forward to building on our positive agenda.
A simple question, do you accept that Victorians are angry at the Labor Party?
Well, my job is to put forward our proposition in a federal election campaign, whether Victorians want free TAFE to continue, whether Victorians who have HECS debts want it cut by 20%, whether every Victorian taxpayer wants a tax cut rather than a tax hike. That's what's at stake in this election. And Victorians understand as well that the sort of culture wars that the Coalition want to engage in, that they've sought to raise during this election campaign, certainly are not in their interests. And they'll also remember that one of the issues in Victoria is infrastructure, and that they were starved of funds by the former Coalition government, which reduced their funding to around 8%, even though Victoria represents more than 20% of the Australian population. They don't want a bloke as Prime Minister who said the Victorians were frightened of going out at night or are frightened of going to the shops. They want a responsible government. That's what you'll get from my government.
Let me put this to you, though. There are, in particularly some areas that have been Labor-held, some acute crime issues in Victoria. As you frame it, you know, Victorians, some of them I've spoken to tell me they are fearful, right? There is a genuine issue there.
People understand the difference between state and federal government. My government has offered stable leadership in uncertain times. You can be certain that you will get a tax cut if I'm re-elected tomorrow. You will get cuts to your student debt if you have a HECS debt. You will get infrastructure investment, including the funding that we've put forward for the airport rail project. I mean, you had the coalition come and do a press conference about airport rail in a winery nowhere near the airport, nowhere near a rail line, and have no idea about Victoria. You have a coalition that has, over a period of time, when they were in government and since, expressed contempt for the interests of Victorians. Now, it's one of the elements in which people will vote over the next 2 days.
Prime Minister, the term quiet Australians has been used by Peter Dutton. Do you worry there are quiet Australians who will either push you out of government altogether or into minority?
Well, Australians will all have a vote tomorrow.
But to the term
what I know
quiet
is
Australians?
We've put forward a positive agenda. We've put forward an agenda that is about building Australia's future, but also providing cost of living relief going forward. Peter Dutton opposed every cost of living measure over the last 3 years, and now he's not putting forward anything positive, any lasting measure, not a single one, on cost of living during this election campaign.
From the polls, it looks like there could be a One Nation vote surge, particularly in outer suburbs. What do you think it's fueling it?
Look, not up to me to... I'm not the commentator. You are, Patricia.
Politics.
My job isn't to comment on politics. My job is to do politics. My job is to implement an agenda that delivers that cost of living relief immediately, but helps to build Australia's future, helps to build jobs, helps to provide opportunity through free TAFE, through our better and fairer funding for every school that we're doing in partnership with the Victorian government.
In some key places?
Well, I'm not the commentator, Patricia. My job is to go out there and to advocate for the Labor Party. I have a fantastic team. I'm here in Devonport with the wonderful Anne Urquhart, who's seeking to go from the Senate to the House of Representatives to represent the people of Braddon. I'm here with my fantastic Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles, and all of our ministers are out there. Now, the coalition have not been able to stick to a policy for 3 days in so many areas on issues like working from home that they want to get rid of, but they reckon now's not the time to let Australians know about that. They have a $600 billion nuclear plan that they can't explain, that they can't go anywhere near a nuclear site. These are the issues that Australians will weigh up. 40% of Australians have voted already in this election campaign, but over the next 2 days they'll weigh up their options, and my job is to advocate for Labor's interest, because I think that is in Australia's national interest as well.
Well, let me take you to something that's happened today. Julian Assange has endorsed you, talking about only you and the Pope, I think, put the effort in to get him released. Is that a welcome endorsement?
Well, that's a matter for Mr Assange, but one of the things that my government has done, whether it's Sean Turnell from Myanmar, Chang Lei from China, Chow Van Kam from Vietnam, Julian Assange, or the Bali Five, is to advocate for Australians and to make representations to look after Australia's national interests. That is what I will do if re-elected as Prime Minister. It's what we've done over the last 3 years. We inherited, frankly, a mess of Australia's reputation internationally. We had terrible relations with the Pacific, with ASEAN, with our neighbours, with France. And one of the things that I've had to do is to repair the diplomatic relationships, repair the economic relationship with our major trading partner in China. And I have acted to represent our national interest.
Well,
and
let's talk
part
about
of that,
some international
of course,
issues.
was Mr Assange, and making sure that he's now in a position where he's able to spend time with his family. I think that's a good thing.
When would you visit Donald Trump after the election? The G7 in Canada is coming up. Is that an opportunity?
Look, perhaps, but I'm not getting ahead of myself, Patricia.
I know,
we have an
but if you
tomorrow.
were to win, like, that's the caveat. Okay?
We have an election tomorrow.
Yeah, but if you were to win,
We
is
have
the
an election
G7
tomorrow.
the right opportunity, in your view, to try and tee something up?
Well, we have an election tomorrow. I'm not getting ahead of myself. If we are successful, there are a range of world leaders have reached out already to try to schedule some contact. I'll wait till after the election to see whether.
Is Donald Trump one of them?
I'll wait till after. I'll wait till after the election to engage if I'm fortunate enough to receive the great honour of continuing as Australia's Prime Minister.
You've stated a couple of times over the last 2 days that you're committed to practical reforms for Indigenous people after the Voice defeat. Just a simple yes/no, will you legislate a voice to Parliament?
No.
And so what is your message to Indigenous Australians who've heard themselves discussed, often without them being central players this last week? You told Australians in an interview a few months ago that you've got their back. What's your message to Indigenous Australians?
And I do. And I do. And Indigenous Australians met at Uluru in 2017, and they determined that they wanted constitutional recognition through a voice. They didn't ask for a voice to Parliament to be legislated because there have been at least 3 different Indigenous advisory bodies to government that have been abolished with the stroke of a pen. That's why they sought to enshrine it in the Constitution. I honoured that request from First Nations people by putting it to the Australian people. It was not successful. The Australian people had their say. I respect that. So we need to move forward.
So what's your message to Indigenous people now then?
That I respect them and that I want to engage with them in practical reconciliation, in closing the gap, in housing, in economic empowerment, in health, in education, that I'll continue to engage with them as I have. I went to Gama after the referendum and outlined our plan for economic empowerment. We're putting in place many of those measures. We have the largest rollout of remote housing that has ever happened in Australia. We have our education, better and fairer funding for schools that will uplift opportunity in places like the Northern Territory and Cape York. We're engaging in health as well through areas of concern to Indigenous Australia, and indeed in the agreement that we reached with the Northern Territory government that I announced in Alice Springs, you have record funding in practical measures, and part of that is about the empowerment of Indigenous people to deliver the programs themselves, is a really important part of that announcement that I made in partnership with the Northern Territory government, and indeed in partnership with the traditional owners that we made there at Alice Springs.
Prime Minister, we're out of time, but I really appreciate your time on the last day of the campaign. I'll be watching very closely tomorrow night. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Patricia. Well, that makes 2 of us.
Now, we asked the coalition if a frontbencher would speak to us to give their final pitch before polling day, and they declined to put anyone up for today. Well, today is really the last chance for the campaigns to make their case after a wild 5-week campaign. Now, the Prime Minister started the day in Queensland, was in Tasmania. That's where he just joined me from. And early this afternoon, he's now going to Victoria to hit those seats where, of course, Victoria is still a difficult state for Labor. Peter Dutton has flown from Adelaide to Perth, where he attacked Anthony Albanese for price rises over the last 3 years. The last 24 hours before polling booths close are really the last chance for the leaders to get their messages out. And both campaigns have been back on message, really on message, trying to persuade voters who haven't turned their minds to politics, aren't very interested in politics, or haven't even made their minds up to back them. Now, opinion polls may show Labor in front, but the Labor Party has been burnt before, and they remember the false positives they got in the polling back then. There's also this surge in polling to parties like One Nation that continue to make this campaign, in my view, deeply unpredictable. We won't know what role minor parties and independents will have in the next federal government until tomorrow night, of course, or possibly it'll even take a few weeks. The voting and then the counting continues. There might be a hung parliament. There will be negotiations to see if a government of stability can be determined. So I want to speak to one person that might get to influence some of these decisions. Let's bring in Independent MP for Warringah, Zali Stegall. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, Zali, you are certainly embedded, I think, a little more. I mean, obviously you still have to run for your seat, but you've been there for longer than some of your independent colleagues. But this is really my question. Do you see this as an election that will test whether independents are a permanent and growing feature of our system?
Look, I think there's no doubt the Australian people are looking for choice, and they've been doing that for quite a few elections now as the primary vote for the major parties keeps dropping. So I don't think the idea that the high vote for independence that occurred at the 2022 election was a blip or a reaction to one leader in particular. I think it's an ongoing trend. People are getting more and more, I guess, savvy and engaged as to having different options. The beauty of our system is compulsory voting and preferential voting, which means you put your order of preference on that ballot paper, and ultimately one of your preferences will be elected. And the more choice we give people on that ballot paper, I think the more competitive it gets. So I do think we are going to see an ongoing rise of independence and more communities wanting more attention. They don't want a backbencher that will just be a proxy for the major party. They want to vote for their community.
In your own seat, before we move on to some other issues, are you feeling confident ahead of tomorrow?
Look, the feedback has been amazing. My team is amazing. I mean, what I have to do is a shout out to the volunteers who, from all parties, I should say, have been out there for the last 2 weeks in rainy weather, not very pleasant, day in, day out, advocating for our democracy. And that is an extraordinary thing to witness. My feedback on the ground has been very positive. My volunteers are amazing. But look, I am an ex-Olympic athlete. I only believe that you win the race when you cross the finish line. So I will stay very focused on what needs to be done until 6 p.m. tomorrow.
So if you are in a position and you are successful and there is a minority parliament, it's still obviously in play, what's the number one request you'll make to whichever man that's in the position to, form government?
Well, look, I think it's really important to look at the will of the Australian people. The ultimate result will be telling in both the lower house and the upper house, because for legislation to become law, it has to pass both houses. And we know both sides of politics have to ultimately negotiate. Until now, they've had to negotiate a lot in the Senate. And a parliament of collaboration where neither side has an absolute majority in the lower house means that they will have to negotiate more in the lower house as well. I see this as a really good thing. You know, my background as a barrister, for clients, we had to go into mediations and you have to put on the table sort of the range of options that are possible, and then you come out with an outcome that suits the vast majority. I see that as the benefit of a parliament of collaboration. I don't see it as an opportunity to do deals. I don't see it as a matter of, grabbing for power. To me, it really is about looking at how can we do good merit-based policy that will serve the Australian people. But number one priority for me will be stability and making sure that the Australian people get the government that will deliver for them.
So is it about the number of seats that they've both obtained ultimately?
It is a factor. It's not the only factor, because
how
obviously
big a factor is it then? Can I get you to give me a sort of sense of how big a factor the number of seats they've both won will be for you?
Well, I think, again, it depends. So if, for example, one side is extremely close to forming majority government but only a few seats away, they have, I would say, prima facie a more likelihood at balance and stability in passing legislation, not needing to negotiate as much. But at the same time, if the two sides are on equal numbers but further away, it becomes a whole different kind of situation. I'm not looking at doing deals or being transactional. I've voted pretty squarely and equally on a lot of pieces of legislation and amendments between whether it's been Labor, Liberal or Greens, depending on the issues. So for me, it really is about looking at the merits of legislation and making sure we keep moving forward in the sectors we know we need to, like our transition to renewable energy, but also make sure we're taking care of the most vulnerable in Australia.
We are very much at the end of this campaign now. Tomorrow by 6 o'clock, everyone who is required to vote will have voted. So given we do know what they're offered, both sides, do you think the coalition is ready for government?
Look, I'm concerned that what I saw in their costings yesterday is they don't appear to have taken any lessons from 2022 election, especially around climate and climate risk and our transition. They are proposing cuts to sectors that I don't really, I don't support. For example, repealing the HECS debt relief for young people seems interesting when we know how much of a factor that is for young people struggling with HECS debt. I don't support cuts to foreign aid. And there is still a massive vacuum as to what their climate policy and commitments are. So there are a lot of issues there, but I also have a lot of questions for some of the propositions the government has put around some of the spending. And I think a lot of more detail is needed. So again, I want to see more specifics and I want to see good legislation so that it delivers.
You've seen the suite of both of their policies now in their fullness, right? Like everything they're offering, at least to the electorate before D-Day, the election day. So you've got a sense of the comparison. You can make an assessment, can't you, of the one that I know that you like your own policies, but which one is, I don't know, less bad? That's how Australians make their decisions.
I know, but isn't that a disappointing situation that we have to get ourselves into thinking of the next 3 years of which will be the least worst option? We have really big issues to tackle, and I think the beauty of a large crossbench is we can put a lot of things on the table. Climate resilience, looking at fiscal repair for the budget, really looking at intergenerational equity and making sure we address those issues properly, not with band-aids, right? A lot of the policies that we've seen put forward by the major parties in this election are band-aids. They are short-term sugar hits, and they don't address a lot of structural issues. So I think with many of my crossbench colleagues, we are more interested in the policies, not interested in power. We're interested in actual long-term change and investment into Australia. I want to see an innovation-driven economy for Australia where we really set ourselves up for the future. That requires vision and political courage. And I hope whoever is in a position to form government, I, as a member of the crossbench, I'm in a position to encourage them down that path.
Do you believe the polls?
It's very hard. The polls, there's a lot of different polls out there, I must say.
The trend is only one way, though, and it's to Labor. Do you believe them?
Look, I think it'll be interesting to see. I think obviously they're based on numbers. I do believe in the strength of individual MPs within their seats. Polls generally are national kind of assessments, and they look at swing of, I guess a swing against or for a side, and then it's sort of averaged out over electorates, and you look at what electorate had a small margin of victory, and so could that electorate be in play? That ignores the strength and the work the actual MP has done on the ground. So I I guess as an independent, I very much see the benefit of strong work during your term with your community, and that can then really be a buffer against any trend against you nationally for a major party. So I think you can't overlook the strength of a good local MP at the end of the day.
Thank you very much for joining us, and I suppose we'll see, because, you know, that's the beauty of democracy. They decide, we watch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This election, the Greens will be sweating on key seats in Brisbane that they took in 2022, as well as looking to pick up some seats from Labor in inner Melbourne, like Wills, or snatch victory in a three-way contest in Macnamara. There are other options in play. I want to bring in the Deputy Leader, Mehreen Faruqi. Welcome.
Thank you, PK. Lovely to be here and looking forward to Democracy Day tomorrow.
I know. It is an exciting day, actually. We have a great system. So the Prime Minister has said no deals, full stop, including with the Greens. So what does it look like for you if he does not have enough seats but he's got pretty close? What does that negotiation look like, respecting that he doesn't want to do any deals per se?
So we have said from day one that our focus this election, PK, has been to keep Peter Dutton out and the Liberals' racist Trumpian politics out and get Labor to act. Because the last 3 years, Labor has really squandered an opportunity where they've been in the majority in the lower house and they've had a progressive crossbench in the Senate, but we have not seen much progress on climate, on housing. We are in cost of living crisis. So we are going to be in minority government, hopefully, as most experts predict, to be there to get Labor to act on the things that the community and the voters are telling us that need to be acted on, like putting dental into Medicare, like ending new coal and gas, like making sure that renters and first home buyers are at the center of the agenda. As we have put them there over the last term, they have to be at the center of the agenda after the election. And that means reforming negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts, which hand $180 billion to wealthy investors. We want to protect mum and dad investors and one of their investment properties. But we need this investment in so many services that people need right now. So that's what that negotiation looks like for us.
It's interesting you raised that, because the Prime Minister has said there will be no changes to negative gearing or the capital gains tax. And he's gone to the election quite clearly stating that when pushed by journalists, and that's happened. I've seen it. I watch every press conference, so I've seen it quite a few times now. So given that, could you reasonably expect the Prime Minister to break a promise like that as soon as he potentially is looking to form government? Would that be realistic?
Well, if the Prime Minister will have to respect the voters.
But that's what I mean. He would have told voters one thing, and then, do you see what I'm saying? It's a really complicated proposition you would actually be requiring to be in. He's just said something to voters, and then you're saying to him, no, you have to do this. How does that work? How does democracy work that out?
I completely understand that. But on the other hand, we are going to the election saying we will do this. And we have a lot of support from the community. Like, I meet people every day who are worried for themselves, their children, their grandchildren, about housing and how their kids will ever afford to buy their first home. So if we have more Greens in Parliament, which we are on track to get, then we have a mandate as well. And, voters and the electorate has given us that mandate. So it requires from us as well to respect that and to push that. And we have often heard from major parties and Labor, they say no, 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 until they say yes.
This afternoon, Julian Assange put out a statement endorsing the Prime Minister, and it is a really strong statement. I read it in its entirety. Just the sort of language he uses is quite kind of strong. He says, Albo hasn't just stood up to the US to end the political imprisonment of an Australian. He's also intervened for other Australians detained in difficult circumstances, including in China. This government has proven itself unusually capable of rescuing Australians caught up in sensitive political situations. Do you give Anthony Albanese credit for the way he's handled those issues? Because it's quite an effusive statement.
I haven't actually read that statement, but of course the Prime Minister was under so much pressure, PK, from the community, from the Greens, from other crossbenchers for a long time before this came to fruition. So I'm really glad that that has happened, because it was a real injustice. So, you know, this is what I mean when I say Greens' pressure works. It is the pressure from us that has got so many things happening over the years. When we were in minority government in 2010, we got dental into Medicare for kids. Even in this term of government, we've pushed and forced and pressured the Labor government to put in $3.5 billion in community and social housing. The commitment of 20% wiping of student debt has only come about because the Greens and a lot of grassroots movements and students have put that pressure, and that just emphasises the need for a minority government this time around.
It's a funny pitch, the need for minority government, but obviously the major parties are saying there needs to be a majority government. So there's still a disconnect, isn't there, about the sort of pitch on this. Is this the big chance for minority governments to become a normal, in your view? I mean, if there is a majority achieved, does it show that Australia's maybe not ready?
It really is. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to really break this two-party system. I mean, at the last election as well, both the major parties hardly got around 30% of the vote. And I can tell you, PK, I talk to people every single day on the ground, and I have been stopped by people every single day on the ground telling me that they hear the Greens standing up for them, and they are quite sick and tired at being taken for granted, and they are ready for change. They are excited for change, I tell you, and they understand that a broken two-party system, which cares more for big corporations and billionaires and less for people and the planet, needs to change. It's not just me saying it, it's phone calls we get every single day. It's people I meet every single day. So I think people are really ready, they are hungry for change, and this is our opportunity. We can do this, and that's better for democracy, that's better for people, and that's better for our planet.
Final question. If you do lose some seats in Brisbane, for instance, will you take that as a kind of lesson about perhaps some of the tone of the last parliament? Will that be a moment of reflection?
Well, what I'm focused on at the moment is for us to win every single MP and senator that we have in Parliament now, for them to get back and to win other seats, which we look like on track of winning. Richmond in New South Wales, McNamara and Wills in Victoria. And I really want Parliament to look more green, and that's what I'm focused on at the moment. And I'm sure there'll be reflections to come when people vote tomorrow and when the results are counted on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah. Definitely allowing people to vote is important. So we'll see then. Thank you very much for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me, PK.
The Coalition released their costings late yesterday, and one of the big notes out of it was the Coalition's proposed cuts to foreign aid. They say it's a freeze in indexation, but the cuts are set to basically cost save the budget $813 million, with funding to the Pacific, Indonesia and Timor-Leste to be exempt from these reductions. Now, humanitarian groups are concerned over the move, and they say it will make Australia less safe too. I spoke to the Australian CEO of Save the Children, Matt Tinkler, a short time ago. Matt Tinkler, welcome to Afternoon Briefing.
Great to be with you.
So yesterday we got the Coalition's costings. They outlined their spend on foreign aid. They say it's not a cut, but a freeze in the indexation. Do you accept that?
No, not at all. There was over $800 million planned to be spent in foreign aid, which is no longer there. As a person who runs a large organisation working in foreign aid and development, I can tell you that our costs are increasing dramatically. The needs we are being demanded to be met for children as a result of the rising global need is extraordinary. So it's a cut in anyone's terms from our perspective.
The Coalition has quarantined some areas, including, of course, the Pacific. Is that a positive development?
Well, it's definitely important that Australia looks after the Pacific, our near friends and neighbours, and there's certainly plenty of need there to be met from a humanitarian perspective. But what I would say is there is need everywhere around the world. If you think about Myanmar in the last couple of months, the significant earthquake that's occurred, the conflict that's been raging in that country, let alone significant humanitarian events like the conflict in Gaza or Ukraine or Sudan, the need is extraordinary at the moment in our world. And quarantining the Pacific might preserve some of those important relationships and outcomes there, but it does nothing to meet the demand and need that exists elsewhere, and Australia should be able to step up and meet that need as well.
So give me a sense of, you say $800 million in cuts, where those cuts will be felt most acutely in your assessment.
Well, we have to speculate because there's no detail, Patricia, but we anticipate that it would be likely that some of the UN funds would be a likely source of the cuts. These are things like Gavi, the Global Fund for Vaccines that supports life-saving vaccines for children. It might be the Global Partnership for Education that supports education outcomes. It might be the Green Climate Fund. These kind of multilateral funds that leverage their scale and power to create real impact. It's critical that Australia supports those. It was instrumental in establishing some of those funds, and now it feels like there could be a possible retreat from those. It's also likely to come from geographies like Africa and the Middle East, where there is significant unmet need at the moment. So it will probably involve Australia walking further away from needs in those regions and prioritising the Indo-Pacific.
What do you say to the argument that no doubt the coalition would make that they're looking after our own regional backyard, but kind of pulling back a little when it comes to the rest of the world? Is that reasonable that we think in that kind of geopolitical space?
Well, you've got to be able to do both. I see that argument that says we look after our own region first. That's understandable, and there's some logic to that. But in the humanitarian and development world, part of it is about our strategic relationships and our national security and those kind of things. But part of it, by its nature, has to be about where needs are greatest. That's what being a humanitarian is all about. And if you think about the crisis in Gaza right now, where 2 months of a blockade is leaving people literally starving, if we no longer have the capacity to give at scale to those kind of conflicts, then we are not living our humanitarian intent and our values as a wealthy and generous nation.
I know there was a kind of, well, fierce might be too strong a word, but a certain passionate campaign before this announcement from aid groups to try and stop this being announced. Did you get a heads up from the coalition? Has there been a dialogue about this?
No, we didn't get any heads up, and indeed the aid and development sector have been very keen to preserve the value of Australia's aid program. We think it's essentially a minimum viable product where it is at the moment under the Labor government, and any further cuts are going to be very detrimental. So we worked very hard to talk to coalition ministers and backbenchers and policymakers about the importance of preserving the aid program. So it was really disappointing to hear on the eve of the election that these cuts are being planned.
They have been kind of transparent about it in the costings. Does that make it any better? I mean, they've told us before the election, now you can go in knowing what's expected. What's your assessment of that level of transparency?
Well, I guess it's something that we can see the level of reduction that's planned, and we can see that the Pacific and Timor-Leste are going to be ring-fenced. But as we discussed, it tells us nothing about where that $800 million is going to be ripped from. What I can say is there will inevitably real human consequences to withdrawal of funding at that scale, because we know this money is having a life-saving impact to people on the ground where it's needed most. So our real regret in this situation is that we don't understand where that's going to come from. We'd love to have that conversation with the coalition, but it looks like we've run out of time ahead of the election at least.
Well, we'll see what the outcome is, of course, tomorrow night. We don't know. Australia is still voting. Thanks so much for your time, Matt.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on the program, Patricia.
Well, we're at the end of the federal election campaign. The only thing left is for you to go and vote, although so many of you already have, to look back at how the last 5 weeks have played out and project what might happen tomorrow night, or at least what might be influencing voters when those booths close. Let's bring in our Friday panel, the last panel before we know a result. Karen Middleton from The Inside Story and Peter Harter, the international editor of the Nine papers. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Patricia.
Wow, well, this election has been quite the wild ride. Starting with you, Karen, it's been a pretty interesting last 5 weeks. Just opening reflections, where are we at?
I think in terms of the outcome, if you mean that, I think the...
it's the only thing that people care about?
Yeah. Look, nobody's really willing to make a definitive statement about that. I think probably the most likely outcome is still a Labor minority government, but, you know, there is so much still in play and there is so much of the vote that is what they call soft, undecided, and a lot of seats on a knife edge. So really, these last couple of days are significant to help people make up their minds, and it's a really hard one to pick because it isn't just about those national polls, and they're a bit deceiving this time around. I wouldn't be putting too much store in the fine detail of those two-party polls. It's been a seat-by-seat race, different issues in different states, different issues are related to candidates, and a lot of those seats are going to go down to preferences and depend exactly who runs third and then whose preferences get distributed. So we nerds, we're going to be watching very closely tomorrow night.
Oh, there's so much to look at, and as David Spears said on the podcast with me this week, Peter, it's the most exciting thing is having the answers to all these questions we've had. So you actually get the actual facts and how people have really been behaving. Peter Dutton's just done a radio interview. I've just seen some of the quotes. He, again, is talking about the quiet Australians. It's always surprised me that he would use Scott Morrison's 2019 miracle kind of language, to be honest, but he reckons there might be lots of quiet Australians. Is he right?
Well, let me tell you that privately, even the most enthusiastic and optimistic of the projections that the Liberal Party operatives themselves are saying is that they can get to 70 seats, maybe at the absolute outside 71. Now, to get a majority, you need 76. So even in their most enthusiastic moments, they are conceding that they will not get a majority tomorrow. So the least likely option tomorrow is that we get a majority Peter Dutton government, and the next most unlikely is we get a Liberal minority government. The most likely, based on the information we have now, which, as Karen says, is highly imperfect, but you're asking us to take a stab, so let's take a stab, is the most likely is that you get a Labor government with Albanese leading either a minority or majority government, and all the direction of travel since the campaign began, and even slightly before the campaign began, has been in the favour of the Labor Party.
Mm. It might seem superficial to analyse the demeanour of the men or the vibes, but I don't know if it is entirely that stupid, actually, Karen, because often you can sort of pick someone's mood, and the Prime Minister has broadly been in a better mood. Peter Dutton has seemed sometimes like there's a weight on his shoulders. That's like analysing some body language from me, and I'm certainly not a sort of psychologist, but there has been some difficult days for him. How do you read their performance?
Well, I think that's true, and I think it's got a lot to do with the preparation that was done beforehand. So the Prime Minister, when he was the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, had a pretty rotten, or patchy at least, campaign last time around. It was the first time that he had run as opposition leader, and it was tough on him. He was a lot better, so expectations were starting off low for him, but he's clearly sharpened up his campaign act in terms of the public presentation in the last few months. And he was talking about mostly about things we'd already heard about. And I think while Peter Dutton is often a more articulate communicator, he was a bit stymied by the fact that a lot of this policy wasn't out early, it wasn't out in detail, and so there was a lot of explaining to do and a bit of flip-flopping that occurred, and then one or two mistakes which you can also put down to first-time campaigning. And he also didn't do a lot of press gallery journalist interviews. He sort of avoided a lot of critical or interrogative interviews through the last 3 years, and while they are never pleasant, they are good practice for a campaign, and so maybe there's a little bit of missing out on that as well. And he has seemed a little bit more combative and hostile. And we know there's a lot of media that he just doesn't like.
Mm. No, that's right. I think it's actually interesting if you look at the mistakes of the campaign. It's often when I've put this kind of theory out there, Peter Harter, I want you to just riff on this with me. It's often when they're talking to people that are fellow travellers, like for Peter Dutton speaking to Paul Murray on Sky After Dark. For Petty Wong, it was talking to the Batuta Advocate and talking about her reflections on the comparisons of The Voice and same-sex marriage, which, you know, has distracted the Labor campaign in the last couple of days. What's the lesson there in terms of getting very comfortable in a space?
Well, the lesson is that when you're talking to someone you think is sympathetic, you are tempted to overreach, to overstate, to get carried away, and that is to blunder. And Scott Morrison, Peter Dutton and Albanese should have and could have learned from Scott Morrison. He only really ever talked to sympathetic right-leaning media, and as a result, he was constantly overstepping the mark, constantly blundering, and constantly needing to correct himself. This American-style alignment of, in a politician's mind especially, of a media outlet with an ideology or a political affiliation is dangerous for the politician, him or herself. Dutton has been much more prone during these last couple of months to that temptation. Albanese has been extraordinarily disciplined and controlled. But it is, as Karen said, it's not only good practice, it's just good politics for a politician to talk to as much of the media as possible, rather than Dutton during this campaign just a couple of weeks ago, characterising the Guardian newspaper and the ABC as hate media, apart from which, quite apart from the silliness of the whole thing, is the fact that it's politically counterproductive, because a lot of ABC viewers would recoil from that, and a lot of those are in Teal seats that the Liberal Party would love to win back. But the more they carry on with that sort of appeal to the right-wing fringe, the less likely they are to get back their traditional heartland Liberal seats.
Well, I can say there's not a moment of hate in me, actually. So just to be clear, on Afternoon Briefing,
I
call
trust
us
you,
the
Patricia.
love media if you want. Karen, yes, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the other interesting thing that the Labor Party has done is they've also broadened out and gone around the press gallery a bit as well, and done a lot of interviews with podcasters, with FM radio. We know the Prime Minister's been doing that throughout his Prime Ministership, and the upside of that is that it makes him comfortable. So there's an upside to the comfortable thing, provided, as Peter says, you maintain the discipline. And we often talk about Anthony Albanese as a confidence player, and when he's able to be himself and talk, you know, in a way that he likes to talk about the footy. He's been talking about the footy a lot. It helps him boost his confidence. So provided you maintain the discipline, that can be good, but that is always the challenge. And if you let your guard down, as we've just been saying, that can be diabolical.
Just a bit of an assessment on some policy and the direction, because that's important, not just personalities and performance. Costings. Peter, they were out yesterday. The coalition actually will get us more into the red in the next 2 years. Then they say there'll be a budget improvement, but there's still no surplus on the horizon. There's also some other, you know, elements in it. Cuts to foreign aid, for instance. They contest the word cuts, can I say? They say it's a pause to indexation. There are other elements too. What did you make of that?
I thought it compounded a mistake that the coalition made a few weeks ago, just before the campaign proper, and that was in the budget, where the Labor Party outlined 2 very modest tax cuts over the next couple of years, and the Liberal Party opposed those tax cuts. So which party now is the party of lower taxes? I thought that was an unforced error. I thought the Labor Party, for a very modest budgetary cost, won a huge political victory. And the Liberal Party handed over, uncontested, their former title of being the lower taxing party. And then they've compounded that mistake, I think, with the policy costings that they released yesterday, which, as you say, show that for the next 2 years at least, the Liberals expect that they will run higher deficits than Labor is planning, although it moderates and reverses in years 3 and 4. But of course, the further out the years projected, the more unlikely they are to be achieved. So again, that was surrendering any claim to being superior fiscal managers, and the margins aren't big. In both the case of the tax cuts and the costings, it's not like we're talking huge volumes of money or percentages of GDP. We are talking slender slices, and the Liberal Party, I thought, really, really fouled that up.
Karen?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's confusing now, the messaging, because the great advantage the Liberals have always had is that they are seen as the better economic managers, and they have railed against debt and deficit, and they have railed against the Prime Minister for not getting, and the Treasurer for not getting the economy in shape fast enough. So it is then a confusing message to say, oh, but we're going to have larger deficits, but don't worry, in a couple of years it'll all be a lot better than it is now. And that goes to the trust thing, and the coalition's been running heavily on the 2004 John Howard slogan, who do you trust to keep you safe and manage the economy? And that only works if the answer is obviously you. But if you keep on doing things, making mistakes, changing policy, sending confusing messages that challenge whether you can be trusted or not, then the potency falls away from that argument and you lose your advantage. And their great advantage is this reputation about economic management. So they keep undermining themselves, which is puzzling. I think it's still their advantage in the next 24 hours, but because there is unhappiness with the way the economy's run and people are really hurting. But have they undermined themselves with this mixed message about deficit and debt and economic management? You know, it is puzzling.
Just finally, we've only got a minute and a half left, but top 3 seats you'll both be watching, and the brief reason. Peter?
Well, I'll be curious to see what happens with those Teal seats. There's a good prospect that the Liberals can win one, maybe even 2 back, but Kooyong and Curtin. But then there's also the prospect that they'll surrender another Liberal traditional seat to the Teals, and that's the seat of Bradfield in Sydney. But really to see whether the Liberals have just lost those seats permanently. 7 seats to date over 2 elections that they've lost, and they're the traditional seats from which their leaders, their prime ministers and treasurers have come from. Have they lost them permanently? That's one of the big structural questions at stake tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. Karen?
Let's say Chisholm and Menzies in the middle of Melbourne and McEwen on the outskirts. That's 3 in Melbourne, 3 in Queensland, those Green seats maybe in Queensland, and a whole bunch in New South Wales, and then 1 or 2 elsewhere. It's hard to get down to 3, and that says everything about the kind of election we're looking at.
I know, because the old pendulum we used to look at looked so different, the seats we would look at. There were fewer names to remember. Guys, remember when things were easy? Now you have to study so many, which I've been doing every night. Thank you to both of you. It's been a great conversation right at the end of the campaign.
Pleasure,
Thanks.
Patricia. See you, Karen.
See you.
Karen Middleton and Peter Harter there. And of course, yes, this is officially our last program before the election. Of course, Afternoon Briefing will be back next week, which we're very excited about, where we will hopefully have, or be close to, if it hasn't happened on Saturday night, a result. And that means we'll have perhaps either a new government to talk to, or maybe not a new government, but a new form of government, who knows. But we will be here 4 o'clock on Monday and, of course, all week next week. Of course, there's other things to look forward to too. The most important thing of all, Saturday night on the ABC with our election coverage. I'll be part of that. There'll be many others as well, bringing you the best results with Anthony Green the last time on air for the election. He will remain at the ABC too, though, of course. Stay with us here on ABC News. Lorna Dunkley is up next. I hope you enjoy your democracy sausages. Even if you've already voted, go and buy a sausage, especially if it helps fundraise for a school. See you next week.